Hello, everyone. We are live at the new episode of eCommerce Growth Show. So today I'm with Michael Aagaard. He's generally known as one of the most passionate and enthusiastic people in the CRO industry. Has worked full time with conversion rate optimization since 2008, so that's 12 years since then. And his research driven process has helped companies all over the world create better experiences for their customers. Michael, thanks a lot for being part of the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Perfect. So first of all, tell us how's it going over there? How's life on your end?
It's a bit weird. It feels like a long time this lockdown thing has been going on. We used to live in downtown Vancouver, but a couple of years ago we moved out of the city. So we're kind of far away from the city, so there's not a lot of people here, which makes it a bit easier. We're renting a property, so we have quite a bit of space here, which is really nice. Which I think is a lifesaver. I think if we'd been in the tiny apartment still in downtown Vancouver, I would have been crawling the walls. So that's a bit weird, but hopefully they're gonna. It looks like it's gonna get better soon here. But apart from that, yeah, I'm glad I'm working online, because then it means I can actually work while this stuff is going on. So I feel quite fortunate for that, definitely.
We're all the lucky ones here.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, and very cool what you guys are doing. All the free stuff you're offering. That's very, very cool of you.
Yeah, we've been doing first an e-commerce growth summit, and then due to the public demand, we've realized that we can do weekly episodes with that. So thank you.
Oh yeah. Yes, my pleasure.
Great. So the first question, Michael, is how you've landed into the conversion rate optimization space at the beginning.
Well, I think like a lot of other people, I kind of stumbled into it almost, or it kind of happened because back then CRO wasn't particularly well established. There wasn't like a million courses and blogs and stuff, where you could get inspiration and training and stuff. So it was very much kind of cowboying it, just learning by doing. So I had a job at or while I was still in university, or Copenhagen Business School, I had a kind of a gig at this agency as a copywriter, and they were doing SEO and stuff. And that was kind of my introduction to the whole online thing. I wanted to write, and then I worked for them for a couple of years and started realizing, it was even SEO wasn't, super well known then. So I started realizing that a lot of what we were doing back then was, just getting so much traffic to the websites. But then when we looked at the data, it was like, well, this traffic isn't really turning into money. And then I thought maybe that wasn't the most interesting thing than just driving traffic to websites. I think obviously SEO has come a long way since then. It was kind of, rudimentary, but that got me then more interested in what actually happens when visitors land on your website, and how do we actually, help them do what we want them to do. And that was kind of my introduction to it. And then I started learning a little bit about split testing, Google. I can't remember what it was called. Was it Google? I think it was Google that had that first split test tool we're using, and VWO came out, and that was a big thing for me, because then I could start kind of setting up my own tests and stuff. And that was kind of how I got into it. And then I was very focused on copy in the beginning, and then I've kind of transitioned. I don't really do much copywriting anymore. Now it's mainly the research that I do. And then in the meantime, I've worked for a couple of different agencies. I've been self-employed for most of the time. And then the reason I ended up in Canada was because I joined a company called Unbounce as their kind of lead optimization guy. And then I was there for a couple of years and left them to go back to being solo, basically.
The lonely Viking in Canada.
Yes, totally.
Perfect. So, Michael, what's your take in the current conversion rate optimization space, and what do you think the e-commerce, as our audience are mainly e-commerce managers, marketeers, are missing out on from this methodology to improve their companies?
I think I sometimes compare CRO to where SEO was some years ago. I think there's kind of a similar development as far as it's starting with this kind of exotic thing that nobody really understands, and then everybody gets really excited about it, and then everybody starts doing it, and then so many kind of do it wrong, and then there's an evolution, and then I think SEO now is like a no-brainer for most people, and they kind of get it, and it's just everybody does it, and I think that's where CRO is going to end up, or growth hacking, or whatever we want to call it. I don't quite understand the differences between all these different labels necessarily. It's all about growth. So I think right now it's on the map very much, and I think a lot of companies kind of understand they have to do it. But I think the biggest problem is how to do it. How to get started. I think that's, in my experience, where a lot of people are confused. And there's so much information out there, blog posts and courses and all these experts and so on. So it's easy to get confused, and it's very easy to kind of get distracted by shiny things like, there's this new tool out that will, make everything better for us. And in my experience, that's not necessarily really the way it goes. So I think that's kind of an issue. And then the other thing I think is kind of a lack of a methodology. So it becomes kind of sporadic split testing now and then, that you kind of do it here and there. Or that it's, that it becomes this thing where you just kind of are testing random ideas or whatever, the team kind of came up with. And in my experience, that is not the best approach, because it becomes a bit of a random thing then. And then, if on top of that, if you haven't done your calculations and kind of understand what your bandwidth is for testing, that's where it goes really bad for a lot of companies. I find is when they get involved with a split testing program, but they maybe don't quite have a grasp on the underlying statistics. So you end up running all these tests on way too little traffic, and all of a sudden you think you've made progress kind of scientifically, but actually you haven't. So I think it's kind of that confusion that's a big problem right now. And then another issue I've encountered myself is, I think a lot of companies, in principle, they agree with the whole kind of data-driven or experimentation culture, but when it then comes to everyday reality, they're not really on board with it. So you have to have a somewhat agile company, that's able to actually figure in experiments and so on, and not necessarily A/B testing, but experimentation. And that also means that you have to have a company that's kind of geared towards doing it, so you don't constantly run into these barriers of having to get buy-in from, 32 different managers and leadership and, so on, to be able to pull off, a proper program. So I think there's a lot of that going on. And then I think, I'm not trying to be rude at all. I'm just trying to be honest with my experience. But I think there are agencies also that offer CRO without fully understanding it, because they do everything. So of course they also do that. And I think you have to be really careful there, because I'd say CRO is such a vast and complex area. Discipline that you really have to have a pretty firm grasp of a lot of different things. And I think if you just kind of jump in and assume, then you can just do it. Then that's same thing with SEO. If you're just going, it's just about keywords, that's not necessarily the best thing. And therefore I think there are e-commerce companies out there, for example, who've had a bad experience with CRO, where they kind of think it's this gimmick, And so I think in some ways CRO has a bit of a bad name now, because a lot of people have kind of experienced it as being this kind of snake oil salesman approach.
Got it. Regarding the new approach, so on one hand, we have the agencies that are promising the moon and the earth, and they are doing SEO and PPC and social media, and of course they are doing CRO as well. On the other end, we have the website development agencies, which are promising that they will fix the UX. They will ship your website and you'll start selling instantly. Then we have some scammers, which are, let's say, tricking people into buying courses that will make them rich. and they are getting rich by selling those courses.
Yeah.
And also we have traditional, let's say, companies that have been doing CRO since the very beginning, or
Yeah.
been transformed themselves into conversion rate optimization agencies. And throughout this landscape, we also have lone wolves, which are really data driven and that could really step into the growth process and fix more than the website, but also fixing the mentality of the decision maker.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how would you advise e-commerce managers towards choosing from these offers, despite building a team within the company, because CRO is very expensive and most of them cannot afford to build a 6-7 people team?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. It was interesting what you said with companies that kind of transform, because that transformation is really difficult. So kind of what I seem to see is that the companies I think that are doing best as far as optimization are the newer companies who are kind of born with that mindset. I think they're the ones, they're also easier to work with and so on, because they're a little bit, they're kind of, the companies were born in a bit of a different era where it was, more logical to do this stuff. So instead of having this, massive kind of legacy platform or whatever, or legacy company structure that you have to change, then, they just built that from the beginning. But it is difficult, and a lot of it is about buy-in, and I think a lot of it is also stamina, in the sense that if you really want to implement this stuff, man, like you need stamina, because you're going to get challenged a lot, and it's going to take a lot to change minds. And I don't think the right thing is to kind of, we got to do some quick split tests and get some wins, and then we'll show it to leadership, and then they'll be happy, kind of thing. That is, I think that rarely, gets you all the way. So I think a big part of it is getting the buy-in first and foremost, and you can get buy-in one step at a time. But I would say, okay, there's so many different places to start. So for a manager, for example, I would say one of the things you have to get a better grasp of is kind of the discipline CRO, I think, because one of the problems is if the manager doesn't have a pretty good grasp of it themselves, then it's really difficult to hire someone, and it's really difficult to kind of challenge people and kind of figure out if they are up to the standard you're looking for. So I think one of those things is and then obviously you shouldn't buy one of the scam courses you talked about, but I think there are good resources out there. For example, CXL. Yeah. I've done courses for them, and I think they're very legit. They have a lot of good content, and those for a course like that, a manager doesn't necessarily have to turn themselves into like a CRO expert or something, but go through some of the basic things so you kind of have an understanding of maybe overall what's involved with it. What is conversion research look like? Understand more about the statistics behind the split testing and so on, so you can actually challenge the data. And so I think educating yourself goes a long way. And then I think there's a couple of different approaches then, as far as if you're trying to hire someone, you start maybe with a small team, then what you could do is reach out to someone who's well established in the business and have them kind of help actually find the person. If you might have taken some courses or something and gotten your own knowledge level a little bit higher, but then you can use someone else to kind of help vet different people who are applying for the job. And then I would say you gotta be a little bit of a political genius, I think, depending on the company size, because you really have to understand who to talk to. And I think a lot of it is planning these ideas with the right people. Obviously leadership and so on, but you also got to get backup from the people who are actually going to implement this stuff, for example, and be working with it. And I would say CRO is not just, like you said, not just about, just looking at the website, you might, there's so many other, well, with e-commerce, obviously it's a little bit different, I think, but for example, with SaaS products and so on, zero optimization can be used in together with product development and so on. So I think there's a big role for it, but you kind of need to get out and introduce this stuff to all the different stakeholders and all the different people who actually call the shots. And then if you, for example, hire someone, then I would you need to get someone who kind of has the personality and the drive, the passion, to champion it, to really show what it's capable of. And then I'm a very, very, very big proponent of your research, of doing your research. So I would also say that if you're interviewing an agency potentially to work with, or maybe a solo person, then that's one of the things I'd be quite interested in. That's one of the questions I would use to vet them, is kind of like, so how would you kind of start this process with us? And if they say something like, we'll just, we'll get some split tests going and then everything will be golden, then I'd be pretty apprehensive about it, because what I would be looking for is the agency or the person being able to demonstrate an actual process, So if they can talk you through an actual process for how they're going to do this, that's a good sign. And then I would say that they should right away start talking about the research that they're going to do from the beginning. And also just a thing like, if they assume that you're just going to do a bunch of split tests, that could be a bad sign, because then it might mean that they're not aware that you can't just run split tests on any website. Like, there has to be enough traffic. And in many cases, we're talking tons of traffic before it really gets fun. I mean, we're talking like 1 million visitors or something before you can really pull off a good split testing program. So I think there's some questions like that are worth, you can use to vet whoever you're trying to work with. But it's difficult. It really is.
Yeah.
And then, with the research, one of the things there I would say is an approach I've used with companies is, when you start with all the research, then that can be a really solid approach, because what I use that for is to show problems and also solutions, but mainly to shine a light on problems. And when you have data, from analytics showing that on step 2 of the checkout, we're losing 80% of users, you can pretty easily demonstrate the money that you're losing there and what would happen if you could, make it better. Or if you have, for example, your session recordings where you're showing, people not being able to figure out the UX, or, if you have user tests where actual real users in the target audience are saying this, oh man, this sucks, or whatever, so things like that go a long way in convincing the stakeholders to actually give it a shot.
Talking about the research, Michael, how would you start for, I don't know, let's say a mid-sized e-commerce company? What kind of data would you ingest before actually starting to do split testing or?
Yeah. Well, in a perfect world, I would have budget enough that, you can do everything you want to do, and then you don't always get that, so then you have to kind of make do. But the way I usually start my process is I want to get access to analytics as quickly as possible. I basically refuse to do any work if I can't get access to analytics, because I have a lot of experience, and I think there's I've observed a lot of stuff that is kind of best practice by now. I think there's stuff I've experimented with on the last 20 websites, and it worked. So there are some things I think that make sense, also just from a UX standpoint and so on. But those are all assumptions until you get some data, right? So for example, a little thing like figuring out what's the device split here and what does it look like. In most cases, what I see with e-commerce is more traffic on mobile and desktop, but a much higher conversion rate on desktop, But just understanding little things like that is super important. Maybe looking at some demographics and stuff, just getting those basic things. So what I'd usually do is then get access to analytics, and then basically have kind of analytics open, and then kind of go through the website at the same time. So I'd start with getting some basic ideas of like, so kind of how much traffic do we have on on the website? Okay, and then that gives me an early idea of whether split testing is even an option or not. Like what's the sample look like as far as conversions? Look at some demographics, look at devices and so on. Try to get a basic understanding of how users kind of use the website, basically, and kind of what's going on. And then I'll start going through the shopping experience, and I'll try to just be a human, not try to be like an expert, but just going through the experience myself. And then I try to kind of make a mental note of the good things I see, where I'm like, oh, that worked really well, that was clever. And then obviously not so good experiences where I'm like, where I start like, scratching my head, kind of, I don't get this. Why? What? When I start squinting my eyes, that's a good sign. So kind of getting an initial idea of things, that could potentially do with some optimization, and then obviously look for basic stuff like bugs or obvious UX mistakes and so on. And then I'll kind of and then screen dump everything as I'm going through. And then I'm not doing an analytics deep dive at that point. I'm just I have analytics there for reference. So if I have a question, I'm like, oh, I wonder where people are going after they land here. Then I'll go like basically asking analytics questions. So I'll go like, okay, well, I got the answer. Oh, they're going here and so on. So that gives me a basic understanding. And then I got all my screen dumps and everything. And then I basically start putting that into a deck already. And then from there, I'll also have a bunch of extra questions. Like, I wonder if this, I wonder if that, maybe some potential, not tests, but optimization hypotheses. And then I'll spend some more time in analytics trying to figure that out, whatever answers I can get from there. And then simultaneously, I've tried to set up using Hotjar or whatever. There's so many different tools out there now, but get some heat maps going on critical pages, get the session recordings going. If the client is okay with it and it's kind of in line with their whatever brand guidelines and stuff, I'd like to get some feedback polls up and running quickly, and those would maybe be based on my initial observations. So it might be something. Yeah, whatever it could be, get that up and rolling. And then one thing that I think is really, really important that I think a lot of people forget in connection with e-commerce is some of the qualitative research. For example, a customer survey. And I think we have a tendency to overlook that in e-commerce because it's like, oh, this is just about buying and just about, UX basically. But there's also a lot of psychology involved with it. So some of the most insightful research I've actually done for e-commerce platforms is sending out a customer survey, and talking to the people who have used your website and getting a lay of the land there, just understanding things like why did you choose this website over all these other ones? Was there something that made you almost not buy? All those basic things to get an understanding of kind of just the USPs and everything. And then from there, if I can find review sites, those are super, super, super useful. Man, you in my experience, often you'll start seeing themes, and if people start complaining about one thing, well, you get some really good hypotheses there. If I can interview, if they do have like a support team, for example, I'll interview them as some of the most important people to talk to because they really have a deep understanding of, the issues and stuff users are facing. And sometimes, that can be even more useful than, interviewing the customers themselves. So just all that stuff. And I'm not saying that you should just get data for the fact of getting data and just keep going. It's just all this stuff helps inform us so much. And then one of the really, really important things I'd say is straight up usability testing. I prefer moderated actual user tests. You can do them using Zoom and so on. You moderate them. I've done that often. You can obviously use the remote user testing setups, but they're quite a lot more limited, I would say. One of the big problems there is that you're not interacting. So if they, for example, misunderstood the task or something like that, then you can't have a conversation about it. And if you see something interesting in the video, like, oh, I wonder why they clicked there and not there. Well, you can't do that. It's too late. You only have the questions that you have there. And also, what I've kind of experienced is sometimes the panels for some of the remote user testing services, they're basically professional user testers. So they're not users anymore. I've had that where you get videos back and the user tester is not really just going through the website.
User.
Yeah, but instead of just going through it, they're giving you optimization ideas. They're saying, oh, if you optimize this, if you redesign that, and you're like, I don't need another expert here. I need an actual shopper. So you have to be careful with stuff like that.
Yeah. You were saying about the surveys on the e-commerce. What kind of surveys would you ask for an e-commerce? I mean, give us a few examples for the ones that are simply trying to understand more about their customers.
Oh, so which of the different kind of approaches I just talked about?
What kind of surveys? What would you like to find out through what web surveys?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, a lot of the basic motivational stuff. I'm looking for barriers. I'm looking for motivation. I'm looking for, the little dials, the little knobs. So, for example, I was working with one client where they weren't completely honest about shipping. So users were pretty angry when they finally checked out and they saw the shipping after they'd actually, done the whole transaction and so on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they placed their order, then they see that the shipping is like, pretty ridiculously high. And stuff like that is just, obviously makes people furious. So while it might have been a good kind of trick to get a little bit higher, a little bit more revenue through, then it's a definite way to kill repeat business. And, understanding something like that I think is just absolutely fundamental. I don't think the client I was working with, I don't think they really did it completely intentionally or really understood kind of what a dark pattern it was they were into. But once you start interviewing, people, then you find something out like that and you're like, guys, this is, we really, really need to fix this. So a lot of the motivational stuff, it would also be, I was working with one pretty unique brand. They're selling fine jewelry for women. And some of the insights we got there were quite interesting, where, for example, one of the big pieces of feedback was it seemed too good to be true. Like the jewelry looked like it was too high quality for the price. And that was actually a big barrier, which is kind of, and stuff like that. It would be really difficult to figure. You can't figure that out from analytics. How would you do that? So you have to have real contact with the customers. But a lot of them were saying it. So part of it, what we started experimenting with then on the product pages was different ways of actually communicating that, no, this is for real. It's just we charge a much lower overhead than most other companies. And we get, we have good deals to get, the materials and so on. So just helping people understand that, they're not selling blood diamonds and stuff like that, just, went a long way. And that's not something you could just kind of come up with or find out while doing your quantitative research, for example.
Michael, regarding the customer retention, we've been doing a lot of research towards the e-commerce companies handling customer retention properly, and we've been finding out that only 25% of the companies are actually allocating resources towards customer retention, and they are somehow hypnotized about customer acquisition, advertising, and so on. So their growth mindset is more leaning towards acquiring customers, and conversion rate optimization also means retention, not only acquisition. What's your take on customer retention?
I think it's super important. Makes a ton of sense. I mean, obviously, it depends a little bit on the product. I mean, if it's something that you inherently aren't,
like wedding rings.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you're not going to buy a ton of those. Yeah, that's a very, very good example. I didn't even think of that. But for example, also I did some usability testing with a company that was selling floors, right? And you're not like, how often do you buy a new floor? Not very often. So they had some other issues there. But if you're selling something that people are gonna buy often, then extremely important. And what I've been seeing from analytics, anyways, lately when I've been looking at e-commerce sites is as soon as people are logged into their account, like conversion rate is way up, AOV is way up, checkout, everything is much better. So I've seen a lot of evidence that if you can get people involved, in, for example, setting up an account and so on, and you have a good kind of nurturing program, that can take you a very long way. what some of the things I've been seeing though is that there's often a lot of kind of barriers to getting people interested and actually getting them. Also, the UX around getting them to sign up to, the membership club or whatever. One of the most fundamental problems I think is just when it doesn't make sense for the customer to sign up. Like you don't get any advantages, and it's just clearly it's good for the e-commerce platform, but there's no advantage in it for me. So I think you have to have offers that make sense. There has to be an incentive to do it, and I mean maybe part of that incentive is if you use the web shop a hell of a lot, then there's obviously if you have an account it's easy to check out, but that's not an advantage in itself. So there has to be some good loyalty programs that you're running. But then a completely different thing I've seen is that it can really backfire the way you're asking people to sign up. So one of the things I've seen, for example, is if you have that step between cart and checkout, where you're asking people to sign up and you got all kind of different messages and stuff, that can be a huge barrier. The other thing I've seen is sometimes the actual page to sign up to the loyalty program is just such a killer. I saw that recently with someone at the website I was going through, where they had this great membership club that has some fantastic membership offers. And on the product pages, they laid out really nice, so it's easy to click over and sign up. But then when you get to the page, it's just this insane form where you have to give all your information, basically, except for all your information, basically, I think, except for your bank account to sign up. And they didn't really position the advantages very well there. So then it's like, well, that's a pretty big barrier to get people through. And then I think the other thing is understanding the nurturing program as far as newsletters or whatever you're sending. I think there's so much work to be done there that doesn't get a lot of attention. And I'm not an expert in newsletters by any means, but it's kind of funny because sometimes you just get either you get so many that it drives you insane, or sometimes you basically get the whole website in an email. Some of those insane newsletters. But I absolutely think it's something that should be much more focused on in e-commerce. But again, going back to what kind of a product you're selling. But that's interesting. It's only 25%.
Yeah. Regarding the transition or the transformation of the CRO to customer journey optimization, do you think CRO is enough to generate growth nowadays? Or do you think the scope of the CRO experts is they have this, let's say, psychological understanding of the user? They also have the training of understanding the data behind and the patterns and the anomalies. Do you think the scope of the CRO is going to expand towards customer journey optimization as well, so that you can see how customers have landed on the website? What kind of journey are you proposing after the purchase? And understanding that CRO right now is only about website optimization, but do you think this is going to expand in the future?
Yeah, I think it will. I think it should, and I think it is expanding. I mean, I'm a little bit confused sometimes by these different definitions. People seem to be kind of stuck on. There's a whole thing where people are like, oh, we can't call it conversion rate optimization anymore, and I agree that that's kind of a silly name now. It's not the conversion rate; it's optimization, it's growth. But all these discussions about changing the label or whatever, or sometimes I hear these weird definitions where it's like, I'm a growth hacker, so I do this, or no, I do A/B testing, so I'm a CRO. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. Some of the stuff, some of the best stuff or some of the big successes I've had have revolved around figuring out there's a bug in Chrome that's causing people not to be able to buy, and then you could argue, is that even CRO, because that's a technical thing? And I'm like, I don't care what you call it. It's about growth. So I think what we're going to see, hopefully, is that there's going to be things are going to come together, and I think generating traffic and optimization and all this stuff, and paid advertising, all this stuff, I think should be much more integrated, and there should be a much better overlap there. And I think it's really important, and I think it's a big mistake in CRO to box yourself in and think that it's only about touching these pages here. There's a lot of other context you need for it. On the other hand, I think it's also dangerous to try to make yourself an expert like in everything also. So I think you need kind of diverse teams, but they really need to work together. I think that's one of the massive problems I'm seeing out there. I think there's still a lot of silos in the sense that, there's like, oh, no, that's not my thing. That's her thing. Like, she's in charge of email. And like, no, he's in charge of PPC. Like, but do you talk? No. And you're like, that's crazy. Like, you're sitting next to each other. One of the things I almost feel I feel kind of guilty sometimes for working with new clients, because sometimes what I'm doing is interviewing people internally in the company who have all this knowledge, and then I present it, and I'm like all this knowledge was there. You're just not sharing it. So I think that's a great question and a great point, and yeah, it should. It's really important that it becomes a much broader view than that. But again, you need people with different skills, and then you put them all under a growth team or whatever the hell you want to call it. I've had gigs that have been close to that, but that haven't been perfect. But I hope one day to be able to work really integrated with everyone who's kind of has a touch point with customers. That would be amazing. Absolutely.
Yeah. Michael, regarding the ROI, we have a question here. How do you measure the ROI of testing over time, year over year, month over month?
It's difficult. I think one of the problems I think is kind of wrapping your head around what testing is and what it isn't and what it can do or what it can't do. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to measure success over time and not necessarily based on. Well, I think that the big question is like, are we doing better than we did yesterday or the week before? And then you need some good metrics for that. But you need to agree on what the source of truth for those metrics are. But I think you kind of have to be, this might be controversial what I'm saying, but you have to be a bit careful with kind of hinging your success on the result of an A/B test. Because what is that A/B test result telling you? It's not telling you that lift is going to be there forever, right? And we can use it to try to see, is this one better than that one? But as far as putting a very specific number on what that lift was and how much money it's going to generate, I think that's a good exercise, but you have to be goddamn careful with it, because what the split test told you was during the period where we ran the split test, this variant was doing better to this degree, but it's not saying, and therefore when we implement it and give it 100% traffic, then this is what you're going to see, for the foreseeable future. So I think that's one of the big problems is, and again, it goes back to, did you run the split test properly? I mean, what influenced the split test? Do you understand that perfectly? And also, was the data solid? Did you have enough traffic and so on? Because like, you have to be really careful when you're like, oh, it was a 50% lift, 50% increase in revenue. Like, just consider that for a second. Like, that's an insane impact. And if and even though the split test said 50%, are you going to see a 50% increase in revenue? Like, you really have to ask these questions. And if that's what you're reporting to the customer, then they expect this massive impact on the revenue, and we might not see it. So I think that's kind of a fundamental question. There is, you have to be really careful on hinging that on a split test, because often you'll see that you see a spike. Oh, during the couple of weeks we ran it, it was a lot better. But then when you implement it, it kind of it goes down again, and it wasn't the lift you thought you had. Yeah. So I think you need an external metric to be able to look at that for. And then one of the things I would say also, I think for in CRO, I think we have to be careful with hinging our success on split tests, on successful split tests. That, you kind of, I think a lot of people have the mindset that there was no value till you ran a split test that had a lift, where I would say the value starts much earlier than that. It starts with all the research, with all the insights, all the fundamental things you're finding to help, the platform to help the business do better. All that insight is crucial. And, there's lots of different buckets. There's some stuff you just need to fix right away. You don't need to sit there and test it. You should have some things in place so you can understand the impact of improving that stuff or changing it. But I went a little all over the place there, but I think it's an interesting, bigger discussion.
Michael, on this topic of future growth, we have the revenue per visitor, let's say, as a metric that aggregates in the e-commerce the AOV as well and the conversion rate, and it's the, let's say, it's a better metric so that you can see the impact and the value that CRO is promising to the stakeholders or the agencies are promising to their clients is that you would have it like a compound interest, right? You will have the impact in the future as well, and you'll be able to see like in 6, 9, 12 months your revenue is better than it used to be. But how do you craft let's say some expectations that are, let's say, not too high, realistic expectations, right?
Well,
how do you set that?
That's a fantastic question, and it's hard to answer. I think there's a lot of different ways of doing it. One of the ways I try to do it is first and foremost by doing all of the, what I want to start a project with is doing all the research. One of my products for a long time now has been research packages, basically, and then maybe I work with the client afterwards, and maybe I don't. But that's kind of where it starts, and that also helps me get an understanding of what the potential is. So I think you need all that stuff to get a better understanding of it, and then based on that, that's also where you can kind of form a basis for the expectations you're setting, right? Sometimes it's difficult. Like there's some products that are really unique. Some e-commerce platforms have these unique products that are hard to get anywhere else, and then motivation is sky high, and it's difficult to actually make changes that have an impact because people are like, they just want it, right? So there's so many different scenarios you can run into, and I think having a basic understanding of all that stuff is important. Or you're like, oh, this website sucks, and then you see like Jesus, this is the highest conversion rate I've ever seen in on an e-commerce platform. How the hell are they doing that? How am I going to make it better, and so on? So I think you need that foundation, and I think the really difficult thing. One of the agencies I worked for a long time ago, when I joined on the first day, the lead of sales was so excited. He walked up to me and said, "Michael, look at this homepage. How much lift can you guarantee on this website? 20%, 40, 30? What can you guarantee? Tell me. I'm going to sell it." And I was like, I have no freaking clue, man. I haven't seen any data. So I think that's the really dangerous approach there. So I offer the whole research first, and then we can talk about if there's going to be a collaboration afterwards. And then one of the things I think is really important is when I present all this to the client, then we're basically managing expectations the whole way through. So they kind of have an idea of these are all the things that potentially are harming you, and this how I propose to fix it. I have some estimates on what we could see here, but we have to be a bit conservative about kind of what we're expecting here. So I think you have to kind of inform yourself first.
Yeah. Anyways, it's indeed a tough question that I'm hearing from a lot of stakeholders, which are data driven and that are understanding the process. But they are asking, okay, if I'm going to buy these services, what can I expect? And once you have those expectations, they will note down their ROI, which is, I don't know, 8x or whatever it is. They calculate their margin. They understand that this is going to work for their budget, and they put it there in the line of budget. And then when the time is finished, they are looking over what they've, let's say, agreed with you or with themselves, because there are not too many decision makers in the companies, at least in the old school companies, the retailers, which are coming from bricks and mortar towards the digital. And they think that everything is measurable, and their expectation is, okay, we'll be able to see that. You have the numbers, you have BIs, you have Google Analytics, you have whatever. We have all the data, right? How can we not, let's say, pinpoint the exact effect of your...
But I think it's a balance there too, because you have to have some predictions. I think you just have to be really careful with those predictions, and also sometimes you have to play along. I mean, if they want those numbers to be able to work with you, then you have to give them. But I think the main thing is just being really, really, really careful about what you're kind of guaranteeing, the kind of lifts. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. I think quickly we overestimate and we oversell. So I think that's the main thing you have to be careful with, because if you disappoint them, you set the expectations here and you deliver here. Oh, that's horrible. But another thing in that context I think is important also is that be careful with using conversion rate as the big golden metric for everything. I mean, I've run so many experiments where we've seen an impact on AOV and not an impact on conversion rate, for example. And then that would be, shooting yourself in both feet if you're going like, oh, well, that's a stupid test, we're not going to use it because they have an impact on conversion rate. It might even have a slight negative impact on conversion rate, but if you're seeing a solid lift in AOV, that's tons of money right there. I think that's another thing that you should focus on also is doing different experiments and building different hypotheses around impacting AOV and AOV alone. If you have enough business, increasing AOV by a couple of bucks for every order is huge.
Yeah, we have some questions, Michael. One of them is. What is better, frequentist or Bayesian or both? It's coming from Russia.
I know. I think that's kind of. I used to have an opinion that Bayesian was way better, and I think in some ways it is. It's a bit more. I guess kind of agile, there's some things around peaking and stuff like that. But I think essentially it's not a huge difference in whatever one you want to use. You still need to have, a decent amount or a good amount of traffic to be able to pull off the experiments and so on. And I think there might be some slight advantages, but when it really comes down to it, it's a question of understanding it. Whether using frequentist or Bayesian, it's a question of really understanding kind of, the statistics behind it and how you're using it. And I think you have to be careful expecting that there is a one thing is this magical solution that's going to be way better than the other one. And I've run a lot of experiments with both, and I to be honest, I haven't practically seen a huge benefit to one over the other. In principle, Bayesian is better to use for this stuff. I think it's a little bit more informed in the sense that we're using priors and so on. But I don't have a PhD in statistics, so I can't argue about the minutia. If you get into a battle with a guy who has a PhD or something like that, I'm not equipped to do that properly. But I think instead of maybe worrying about that, people will just should it be a one or two-tailed test and so on. Like Matt Gershoff, I remember his answer to that. Matt Gershon from Conductrix, who in my opinion is kind of a genius. He jumped into a conversation, I remember, where people were battling around one or two-tailed, and he said, guys, like, there are bigger problems to worry about, than that. So, yeah.
However, at OmniConvert, we've decided to have both of them. So
that's great. You'll
be able to select from one over another, but to give some data behind it, the differences are below 1%. In terms of how many experiments have had significant differences after they've reached the relevance.
Yeah, exactly. And what was I going to say? Yeah, sorry. I've used some also different kind of specialized algorithms with some different really smart folks I've been working with, where in principle, it's like this should be quite a lot faster than the other one. But once you get into testing it, like the difference is, in my experience, it just doesn't save you a ton of time.
One more question from Jonuts. Mm-hmm. Do you think there will be some sort of social media fatigue regarding e-commerce? Nowadays, every page on social media tries to sell you something, and the content quality is very bad. Sometimes disguised as organic posts on platforms like Instagram, Some campaigns are well thought and smart, but most of them are just a way to manipulate. In what way will this work in the future, since everyone seems to attack the users with content?
That's an excellent question. I love that question. I think it's about relevance. First of all, I agree. It's crazy. Like, I try to watch YouTube and you're just like, come on, man. It's crazy. Yeah, also Facebook and, like you said, social media, it is kind of nuts how much stuff you get thrown at you. I think I definitely have a high level of banner, that's difficult to say, banner blindness, in the sense that a lot of it's just like, no, get out of my way, no, get out of my way.
Interruptions.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I think there will be definitely a social media fatigue, and it's almost like a feeding frenzy right now. It's just insane the amount of content out there you're getting, thrown in your face. I really don't know what it will look like in the future, but I think the main thing though is make it relevant. I love Fjellreven outdoors clothes. I spend a lot of time outdoors. And I recently saw an ad from them where it's like, save 25% on pants. I'm like, hell yeah. That's awesome. Woo! I love that. That made me very happy to see that. So I think it's about delivering the right offers, the right time, which is difficult. But yeah, I mean, something has to happen because it's crazy. But I think that another problem then is, in order to give relevant ads, you need some data. And then we're into a whole different, talk about data and privacy and so on. And for me also, that's an interesting one, because I'd like more relevant offers, but am I comfortable with, all these algorithms understanding my behavior that specifically? So I think maybe it's a question about, I think it's a reality now that you get a ton of ads wherever you go. I mean, it's crazy that you have services where you pay a membership to not see ads. That's crazy. Like, what do I get out of this membership? We're not going to show you ads, and I have to pay you. I have to pay you money not to see ads. Yes, okay. But I think a big part of it, I think, is giving handing over more control to the users themselves. So basically, having some kind of way of saying, this is exactly what I see and exactly what I don't want to see, and this is the frequency of how often I want to see these offers. Which is kind of like with newsletters and stuff. Some of them have options of how you want to segment yourself. I think that would definitely make me feel more comfortable with a lot of this stuff. And I mean, it is nuts. I mean, some of the, like, if you try to read the news or something like that, you like the article is like this big, and the rest of it is just ads everywhere. Yeah. It stresses me out.
Regarding the let's say some applicable ideas towards e-commerce CRO, what are some things that you would suggest nowadays, as the users are a bit affected about the current conditions? They are trapped inside their homes and they are behaving differently, right?
Well, I think first and foremost, one thing you have to be really careful with is you can't make it look like you are taking advantage of a terrible situation. I think that's the number one thing. That is kind of, I think that triggers, well, basically a reaction of disgust in most people. Mm-hmm. If you're all cheerful about the crisis, then I think that's could potentially kill your business. So you have to be pretty smart about how you're doing it. I think, you guys were offering, free use of the product and so on, which I think is, that's a very noble thing to do, and obviously you can get some good leads out of that down the line. But I think up front, it's a great way of doing it, and you're not taking advantage of the situation. You're actually saying, hey, we want to help people if they want to be our customers afterwards. So I think that's a good way of doing it, for example. But another thing is, depending on what you're selling, your business could be doing extremely well right now. If you're selling online groceries and stuff like that, then probably some of your problems right now is supply chain management.
Fulfillment, yeah.
Fulfillment, yeah. And then and others might be struggling because they're selling something that people are just not buying now because they can't go out and use it. So I think the difficulties can be unique. But I also think it's about doubling down, going through your data right now and figuring out kind of what are people doing, because there could be different use. I was doing research for one client where they have physical stores. And one thing that was really interesting is while Corona hit, they had a lot more traffic, but a lot of that traffic was trying to figure out which stores were open, which I wouldn't expect. I would think everything was online now. But for this target segment, for this audience, it was just really important for them to figure out where the physical stores were, and they were actually also reserving a lot of products in store so they could go down to the local one and pick it up rather than have it delivered, which is kind of a head scratcher for me because it doesn't really make very good sense. But that's what they wanted. So in that case, I think that makes a lot of sense to actually let them do what they want to do, during the crisis. So maybe instead of forcing them to buy online, then make that part easier. For example, I think offering people incentives, either making it a lot cheaper for people now, giving them good offers because you understand the crisis that they're in. You understand that they don't have the money. They usually do. Things around delivery, things around making them feel safe about it. Just basically accommodating the situation that a lot of people are in right now. I think, I guess it comes down to a bit of empathy, really trying to understand what is the situation that my audience is in, and how can I, accommodate that? How can I maybe change how we're doing things right now to be able to make things better for them. So, there's a lot of restaurants, for example, right now that don't have, I know that's not e-commerce, but, that don't have, they can't have people in the restaurant, for example. So they
zero demand.
Yeah, so they're like, really upping their own services as far as doing delivery and stuff and changing their products, for people's use. There's a couple of restaurants around here where they're, you can pick up a kit. So instead of getting the luxury pizza or whatever you get from the Italian restaurant, then you get the kit and you can do it at home, kind of thing. I also think there's a lot of opportunity. One thing I was kind of researching for a friend was cocktail delivery, for example. And people are stuck inside, and I think one of the interesting data points is anecdotal, but I think it's probably accurate, is that people are consuming a lot more alcohol at home than they normally are. So, for example, taking it, and now I said take advantage of it. That sounds negative here, but then using that opportunity to accommodate them, and so I've seen some interesting some interesting pivots from bars, for example, where they're going like, well, we can't have anyone in the bar. We still need to make money. So now we're actually going to deliver cocktails to people. So we're actually setting up, for example, an e-commerce platform so that people can order our cocktails and so on. So I think there's some interesting opportunities there for sure.
Michael, this is the last question.
Mm-hmm.
How have you applied the CRO principles in your own life to be or to feel more fulfilled?
Interesting. Well, one of the things CRO has definitely taught me is a little bit of, trying to have a little bit, I think, of more of a humble mindset. I think humble is a word that is misunderstood and misused, but I think a little bit of humility as far as not overestimating kind of your own role in things, or maybe overestimating your own kind of opinion, if that makes sense. Because early on in my career, I got really cocky around CRO. I thought I really got it, which I didn't. There was so much I didn't understand. For example, the statistics behind the split testing and so on. And I had some, humiliating experiences where people kind of, put me in my place as far as making it very obvious that there was a lot of stuff I didn't understand here. And that obviously was a horrible experience, which made me really think like, Jesus Christ, all of a sudden I was aware of all these shortcomings I had. And I was like, I got to reinvent myself. I really got to learn to understand this stuff. So I think one of the things that has taught me is a bit more humility as far as what I think I know and what I don't know. And I think I didn't come from a scientific background, and I think that's a big advantage for a lot of people who do in CRO, who understand, the scientific approach and so on. But once I started understanding that better, then one of the things there is, humility around what you know and what you don't know, and not always trying to prove you're right, but trying to understand the ways in which you're wrong and the things you don't understand. And with CRO, because it's so wide and complex. Like I'm very comfortable knowing that I'm going to be a student in this forever. Like I'm never going to know everything, and I'll never claim to do that. And I'll never, I try to be very clear about where my competencies are and where they aren't. If someone asks me about SEO, I'll say I worked with it 10 years ago or 12 years ago a lot, but I don't know where it's at right now. So I wouldn't trust my advice. That would not be good. So and then always staying curious. What's around the corner? What can I learn? And as far as optimizing myself, I love learning new things. I love getting new insight and getting better at things. So if I can look back on the last year and say, am I better? Have I become a better person or whatever? Have I become have I become smarter? Have I, learned to understand other people better? Have I acquired new skills and new knowledge within the last year? That makes me really happy. So I kind of think that kind of optimization mindset of always being curious and being a bit humble around, what you know and what you don't know. And then kind of also asking questions. So if there's something you read or something you see and you form an opinion about it, then maybe we're going like, hey, maybe I should do some research on this before I decide, before I make up my mind here. So, having a little bit more patience maybe before you form your opinions and saying, I got to do my own background research before I kind of make an opinion here. That's another thing I think is a way that this zero process has helped me in life.
Perfect. So Michael, thanks a lot for being part of eCommerce Growth Show. We have the link towards your website with the green call to action for everyone who wants to see more and hear more about you. And where can they find out more? They know right now, but are you open on which social media are you active?
Well, that gives me a good reason to optimize my own website, because I haven't updated that for a very long time. So I'm going to do that probably, or maybe a disclaimer: I haven't worked on it for a very long time. No, I've been spending a lot of time working, so I haven't actually been doing a lot of stuff as far as social media. But you can find me on Facebook, my name, and I Twitter. That's the old name from what a blog I used to have a long time ago. So Content Verb on Twitter, or you could hit me up on LinkedIn. I want to get more active on LinkedIn, anyways. And I think that's a good place to connect. So that'd be good. Most of what I do as far as social media is photography. I do a lot of wildlife photography, which is my hobby. So I've kind of, for social media, that's mainly what I push there.
Yeah. Great, Michael. Thanks again for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun, man. It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
And for you out there, which are still here, next week we're gonna meet each other from 4 p.m. UK time with Mike Dragic from Shopper Free. Until then, stay safe and enjoy life and optimize yourselves.